Good afternoon. This is Professor Amin Dean with Critical Talk, which is a production of Muslim Network TV. Our program this afternoon is Last Thoughts Before the Vote, and I kind of think my last thought is I need a vacation. But in light of all of the things that are going on, I have to say I'm at a crossroads between embarrassment and just prayerful uh, thinking about the outcome of this election. And as I see the lines and lines of people waiting to vote, and I heard that, well, I actually saw, I think it was in Georgia, where they took away all of the polling places except one, and people have to come uh, from all around to come to this one place. And I'm wondering what in our Constitution prohibits it. Something is gone awry. But I thought I'd start with another set of questions. And I have with me this afternoon our regular political commentator, Dr. Scott Hibbert, who teaches a variety of stuff, all in political science, on American foreign policy, Middle East politics, and international studies at DePaul University, where he's been for a hot minute. But he comes to us from government, which really is what I want to get at today. We also have Dr. Khalil Marar, who is also a professor of politics and public administration and justice studies. Oh, they need to cross that out because there is no justice, and research. And he has been around. He has done both Arabic studies and Middle Eastern studies, as has Professor Hibbert, but they've been tracking the stuff we now call a campaign. And I know I sent out a bunch of questions, but I just got one previous question. Do we need to have a constitutional convention? Because there seems to be some stuff that we have discovered in all of this that is missing in our Constitution, which keeps craziness like what's going on from going on. Or are we confronted with two septuagenarians who are having a hissy fit?
Well, I'll just short, quick answer to the first question. The Constitution has its strengths and its weaknesses. In terms of representation, it privileges small states at the expense of large states, small population states versus much larger population states. The Electoral College is certainly a relic of the past. Some of these issues, it would be great if we could have a constitutional convention and hammer and work some of these issues out. It's unlikely that it would actually get through the amendment process. But there are things that could be dealt with through law at the state level, at the local level, in terms of the way in which representation happens. We can give District of Columbia statehood. They would have two senators. That would kind of balance things out. We could change the way in which we count electoral votes. We could also, talk about how gerrymandering happens and how redistricting happens. All those kinds of things you don't need a constitutional convention for, but they could really change the dynamic of the campaigns in a positive way.
Well, that means that these state officials are in charge. I mean, not in charge, but they're the ones that can do the gerrymandering, right?
Yes.
So in coming years, if there's ever another election, I don't think I can stand it personally. Does that mean that we need to vote some people out of office and other people into office? What does it mean so that we prevent them? Doesn't state law prevent them from doing illegal things?
Well, yes, state law allows them to do illegal things, but much of the concern that's been raised is really practice. And this is really where you need, people with better, well, they're more accountable. So here in the city of Chicago, for years, aldermanic boundaries were drawn by Ed Burke.
One person?
Yeah, or his committee, the committee he controls. So, and then typically at the state level, congressional districts are drawn by the, by the state legislature. So when the Democrats control it, they draw it in a manner that's favorable to the Democrats. When Republicans are in control, they draw it in a manner that's favorable to the Republicans. Now, what you could do is pass laws within all these states or across the country to have independent commissions do the redistricting based on demographics and not political considerations. You could have judges do it. I mean, there are different mechanisms where you could eliminate some of the worst abuses within the system. And they're not difficult to do. The political will needs to be there to make it happen.
So Khalil, you're teaching about all this stuff that I don't know anything about. I'm calling my alderman tomorrow. But I didn't know that there were all of these alternatives. I had heard, I'm not from Chicago, but I had heard about Ed Burke, but I didn't know he had a committee and they sat up and did what they wanted to do.
Power sort of creates that. and not only does it create that, but there's also the power of the people, to go back to your original point, which is a very important one. And that is that it is the power of the people. And this is not just Thomas Jefferson, the power of the people to have a constitutional convention. That's a really good distinction that you're making between local, state, and federal politics. And, the Constitution is the ultimate authority. Change that, and everything else could, I'm not saying it will, could fall into place. So, for example, the Constitution gives us all kinds of rights, and those rights are only as good as the enforcement at the state level, barring any federal action. So a constitutional convention is the power of the people to govern themselves. And I think it's important to look at that venue, at that option.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, maybe we have to pack the Supreme Court or something to that effect.
I got to talk about the Supreme Court. But let me get to this one question, because I got asked this the other day. And all I could remember was, when Trump first came into office, he would hold up these portfolios with his name just emblazoned across on something called an executive order. What is an executive order? And I was more interested in something else, because I was trying to see if all presidents did executive orders, and they do. But then I looked at the fact that in 3+ years, Trump has done, he was on course to top Obama's 200 and some odd by quite a few. But what is an executive order, and what does it trump?
So, okay, I'll give a first answer, and then Khalil can give us some guidance here. So when you talk about executive order, it's basically a directive to the agencies of government about how they ought to implement the law. And that's all it is. And the idea is that, the executive branch has finite amount of money, finite amount of resources. They have to prioritize how they're going to, enforce the law. And so, like the famous executive order of President Obama was the DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood or whatever, children who brought here.
The Dreamers Act.
The Dreamers Act. And the idea is that we have, in enforcing our immigration laws, there's all kinds of areas we should be focusing on. This is going to be the least priority. Now, the reason why he signed it is he couldn't get the legislature to pass an immigration reform bill, so he did it through executive order. People were outraged by that, but when Trump has come in, he's, as you said, gone above and beyond and signed any number of executive orders, giving direction to the government agencies as to how they're meant to implement and interpret the law.
So presidents get to do that, huh?
It's a perk of the presidency, and you know that going back to constitutional design, and the Constitution provides that right that a president can, as Professor Hibbard pointed out, issue directives to certain federal agencies only at the executive branch. I mean, when people hear executive order, we don't have a king, we have an executive. And we have the kind of executive that is Donald Trump. Maybe he thinks he's king, but it's important to note that the executive order only applies, as Professor Hibbard so aptly pointed out a minute ago, only applies to the executive branch. And I will add this. I mean, the executive order, the concept of an executive order was dreaded and feared by some founders like Thomas Jefferson. They didn't want a king, right? And yet at the same time, people like Madison and Hamilton, well, Hamilton in particular, Hamilton in particular wanted to have a quote unquote energetic presidency that can issue directives to change the course, to change the ship of state, if you will.
Yeah. If I can add one additional point to this. One of the challenges of executive orders is they actually don't have the force of law, so you can't actually change the law.
That's right.
And
only Congress can do that.
Right, exactly. So only to change the law, you have to go through the legislative process. So but you can definitely change the way in which the law is being implemented. Now, the dilemma for Obama is all the executive orders that he signed were very quickly reversed once Trump came in.
That's right.
And the assumption is that if Trump loses the election, then the minute a newly elected President Biden, first thing he would do would be reverse all these executive orders. So, that I mean, for any number of reasons, that's one of the problems with executive orders, but it's also one of the kind of saving graces, if you will.
Well, let me make sure I'm hearing you right, because I know Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies and institutions which receive federal monies to cease diversity training, for example. Now, he can do that?
Yes.
Because Congress is absent. I mean, they might as well name those folks apples or something else. So when the president wants to get around a hesitancy or a problem with congressional deliberations or something or the other, he can just write an order.
Yeah, but keep in perspective, they're also still subject to both legislative and judicial review.
That's right.
So if he oversteps his bounds, somebody could bring a court case against it, which may get tied up in the courts, but that has been done.
But bounds.
What's that?
He hasn't run up against a boundary that
I know. But the other side of it is, Congress could step in and change the law and make it more clear if there's coherence. Now, part of the issue is the president is taking advantage of the gridlock, if you will, to his will.
Khalil, did you have something to add? I'm done with this government. Go ahead.
Sometimes on this one, it's pretty clear cut. Sometimes I feel like I have nothing to add to what Professor Hibbard and you just pointed out. But I will say this, that, the executive order must be challenged by Congress in order for it to be, like nullified or in order to dampen the effects of it. Only Congress can issue new laws. Only Congress can basically say that this is a law of the land. The Supreme Court can interpret that law, but it's up to the executive branch to be able to carry out executive action. I don't want to keep referring to the thing as executive. Here's the bottom line. The question that you're posing, Amina, is a very important one, and it's this. Where the heck is Congress? Congress is very much there in favor of Trump by its silence. And especially a Republican Congress. And that's exactly why the founders envisaged, I don't want to talk too much about the founders. Some of them were slaveholders, let's face it, right? But I will say this, that some of them foresaw executive orders being abusive, and therefore they argued for divided government. Not a party divided government, not like Democrat, Republican, no. They argued for a divided government, a government that checks itself through the constitutional design. We could talk about that more later. The nerd in me really wants to come out on this one.
Well, but
That's a good point. That's a good
I
point.
think you guys have wonderful, idealistic definitions. The reality is, Congress went on vacation. We have a septuagenarian who is having a hissy fit in office. We have a stacked Supreme Court. And I, as the average, don't know much citizen, am saying, whoa, 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 I know the definitions, but what I'm seeing is not adhering to what's supposed to be. But let me let that lie. Of these executive orders, which do you think are the most important to dump? And I'm going to ask Khalil to slide over to his right just a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Uh-huh.
Did you want to go first?
You know, listen, the problem with jettisoning executive orders is that you could only do so through executive order. You know what I mean? So if, let's say we get an executive called Joe Biden, he's going to have to do the same thing that he's basically condemning Trump for doing. It's not that presidents will condemn previous presidents for executive orders. It's a nice perk to have. It's just that the problem with that is that, just like, you know, President Obama issued a directive called, you know, the Dreamers Act, eventually DACA, right? Trump could repeal that using another executive order. So it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like playing like thumb wrestle or something like that. I mean, the problem with not passing a law in Congress is that it's easily repealable. I'm not saying that a law in Congress cannot be repealed, but it takes much, much longer. And you're right, Emina, a 6-3 Supreme Court that leans conservative, 6 conservative, and 3 that are whatever you want to call them, right? Is very problematic for our liberal brothers and sisters. And therefore, the president matters. Who the president is matters. Trump got to appoint 3 of those Supreme Court justices. If Biden could appoint 1 or 2, that could alter the trajectory of this nation. It's important. The election that's coming up is important. I don't need to say that, though. You all know that, right?
So, okay, so on that point, let me throw out a comment. This is a line that my wife says a lot. Elections matter. And, you know, the reason why Trump has done what he's done is because he's been enabled by a Republican-controlled Senate. And so, in some respects, this is why when I'm watching on, you know, next Tuesday night, more than anything else, is where the Senate goes. And there's a handful of Senate seats. If they go Democrat, then you're going to see a real shift in the balance of power within Washington. Because if you continue to have divided government, you know, assuming Biden, you know, is actually going to win the presidency, if you still have a Republican Congress, you're still going to have a lot of gridlock. Now, going back to your earlier question, though, about, you know, some of the executive orders, it's almost, I don't even really know where to begin. Like, to me, one of the most egregious executive orders was the child separation policy, where and it was meant to deter people coming across the border by separating their children from the family. I mean, it's just absolutely heinous. But that was done through executive order. It was a way in which they were interpreting the law. There are any number of other ones. They've used executive orders to reprogram money, which I find actually illegal. But no one's challenged the administration on.
You mean nobody has, after all of this chatter?
Yeah. So I mean, you know, yeah. I mean, the Congress has not challenged him on it. I think the the House-controlled, or the Democrat-controlled House would like to, but you know, there's so many other things kind of on their plate that's kind of crowding it out. But this is a huge issue that, you know, Congress has appropriated money, and through executive order that's been reprogrammed into another cause. And that's, you know, I was shocked, as if somebody who worked in government, I was shocked that this happened. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, you know, in the future. One last thing, there's a recent executive order, literally in the last 2 weeks, where the Trump administration has recategorized a certain redefined a certain category of federal worker, and eliminated
or whatever it is.
And eliminated their civil service protections. And the concern is that what's going to happen if President Trump actually loses in the election, that they may systematically start firing people and replacing them with political appointees, with the idea being that you're creating mayhem, and that the institution you hand over, the agencies you hand over control to a new Biden administration is going to be greatly weakened, and that's I really fear for that. I mean, I really worry.
Wait a minute. Now, what you're saying is that they may start firing civil servants,
Yes,
and replacing them with
political appointees.
Isn't that what Trump did?
What's that?
Isn't that what Trump did?
Well, so there's a certain, I mean, the way the civil service operates is it's very difficult to fire a federal employee. There's all kinds of protections. You need laws. You can't just get rid of them for political reasons. But there's another category, what's called Schedule C, which are political appointees. And so there's, so at the end of every administration, the political appointees, resign their post, and their positions are filled by political appointees from one administration to the next, and that's fair game. What's happened though is the Trump administration has, in some respects, waged war on the executive branch agencies, marginalizing people with expertise, making their lives very difficult, their working lives very difficult, linking their promotion to kind of towing the party line, and basically forcing them to become more political. And now with this next step, they've actually gone to the next stage, if you will, of categorizing anybody that's involved in like a policy-related position as being a new category, which has different civil service protections and could therefore be fired. And so again, the potential for mayhem between now and January, when the new president is elected, is definitely there.
And by the way, Donald Trump promised his supporters that he would do exactly that. Exactly what Professor Hibbert points out: wage war on the executive branch.
Okay, let me take a break because you all are really ticking me off here. And we will be back. This is Professor Amina Al-Din with Critical Talk. I'm here with Professors Scott Hibbert and Khalil Murar, and they're telling me about the ideals, and I'm suffering under the realities. We'll be right back.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
16 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world? You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned had brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
This is Professor Amina Al-Din, and I'm back on Critical Talk with Professors Scott Hibbert and Khalil Murar. And I first
Your blood pressure is going up, Amina.
I know, and I took a pill though. I want to, first of all, I've been a little remiss. I didn't ask both of you in this time of a resurgence of COVID, how both of you are and how your families are. Well, I hope.
Yes, yeah.
Well,
we're good.
Absolutely, yeah. We're doing well here, and social distancing and wearing masks, etc.
Yeah, I'm a social distance on out of this place. All right, so I read recently that in addition to this visa stuff with these preferred workers, well, two things I didn't understand. I do understand quotas in letting people into the country, and he's taking that down to 15,000. That sounds like a minuscule amount to some of us, but a massive amount to folks on the other side. So I want to go up the middle, because on another show, I asked, should everybody who wants to come be permitted to come? And the answer was yes. And I said, whoop-de-doo. Who's going to pay for that? And they said, well, the government is. I said, who do you think gives the government their money? And they think it comes with one of those cartoon characters out of the air. Well, you should stop spending money on military matters and spend money on the refugees of the world. And I said, all the millions of them? And they said, absolutely. What are your thoughts?
Okay, where do we even begin? I think the initial thought is that the U.S. has immigration laws and laws regarding refugees and asylum seekers, and first and foremost, the U.S. should respect its international treaty obligations, and it should respect the laws on it.
Trump hasn't met a treaty.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And he promised that much once again. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the larger issue is, if somebody turns up at the border, seeking asylum, and they have a well-founded fear of persecution, the administration is obligated under law to let them in. Now,
but how are you going to prove that you have a well-founded fear? I mean, refugees don't carry suitcases of newspaper clippings and all of this other good stuff.
But you'd be surprised how, there's a very strong, robust mechanism of immigration lawyers and immigration courts that sift through all of this.
Yeah.
And make determinations as to whether or not people have legitimate claims. The point is, there's a system there that should be operating, and the Trump administration has, in some respects, tried to hinder that, and created other barriers of entry that are outside the bounds of law.
Yeah, but if you have immigration courts, which have a finite number of people, and you have millions of people coming in, I really have no idea how many, but you have millions of people coming in. How do you handle it?
Yeah. So I think first things first, it's not so much that there are millions of people all trying to get into the United States. There are millions of people that are displaced. In Syria alone, there's 6 million displaced from the country. Afghanistan, Iraq. If you look at where most of the migration is coming from, they're coming from war zones.
Yeah.
And so, on the one hand, you need to have a short-term policy and a long-term policy. And the short-term policy is, you need to find, some kind of sanctuary or safe haven for these groups. Certain countries have been taking them in, like Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey, and they're happy to do it as long as the international community is willing to help, pay for the UN High Commission on Refugees services to provide clothing and housing for them. But there's also,
wasn't there, Scott, to interrupt you, didn't we hire men and women in the Middle East to act as informants for us, to act as translators for us, to do every damn thing? Was the international community paying for that?
We were paying for it.
Okay, so when they get up the creek without a paddle or a boat, then we say, oh.
Well, yeah, and that is really on us, that we have abandoned a lot of our allies in the region and left them high and dry.
Yeah.
But again, the larger issue is, there is a policy response that's constructive, short term, medium term, long term. And at the end of the day, until you help resolve these conflicts, you're going to have refugee flows, and so there's a argument to be having more committed engagement with the world through traditional diplomatic means, which is another set of issues that we can get into. But one of the things the Trump administration has done is systematically dismantled the State Department. It was just and so our ability to even grapple these issues is lessened.
Well, we have both our set of domestic issues with the cries for justice, but we also have the world where we've interfered with cries for justice. I was looking at a Syrian, I guess you would call it a refugee camp. I don't know if you would call it a refugee camp anymore. It looks like a city to me. And the increase, they're living on top of one another.
Yeah.
COVID is off the chains, and they have a few doctors to tend to all of this. And I'm saying, okay, I don't know that we want to be doing something, but it seems like I know that there was this phrase I learned in elementary school, but I've forgotten most of something about carry a big stick. But we have
Speak softly and carry a big stick.
And so we have spoken loudly and carried a big stick and interfered or supported authoritarian governments, left tyrants in place. And when all hell breaks loose, then we want to pull back and become isolationists. And I'm not sure what all of that means. I'm throwing around terms I learned from you guys. But what the hell does it mean? What does it mean? I'm going nuts over here.
I mean, some historians want to treat it like a pendulum, like we go from isolationism to engagement. But I think that the Trump administration has tried to have it both ways. We're both isolationist and interventionist all at the same time. It's really a paradox, and it's a sort of an incoherence of our approach to global affairs, but also to domestic affairs. My God, we're divided ourselves here. I think the one thing, Professor Aldean, you make some very good points that got me thinking. And one of the things that it got me thinking about is that, our own house is not in order. And I think that, the historian in me wants to look at American history and say this, that when our own house is in disorder, we generally tend to be fairly isolationist. When we get a little more comfortable, a little more confident, we tend to be more interventionist. I know it's a simplistic way of thinking about things, but I think it's important to keep that in mind. And right now, we are wounded, not just by COVID, but by the trillions of dollars, unfunded liabilities, state budgets, the COVID shutdown, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, one can't help but be a little bit isolationist. And yet at the same time, we have to remember that what brought us to this point, whether you want to call it the Wuhan virus like our president does, or, COVID, SARS-CoV-19 or SARS-CoV-2, you basically have to face up to the reality that, just like September 11th, that this is something that is an international phenomenon, that it came from abroad, and that the sooner we look abroad, the better off we will be domestically, and vice versa.
Well, we still have, it's hard to be isolationist when you find yourself needing PPE and all of it comes from China.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, in our reality today, professors, we're going to be divided. No succeeding president is going to be able to heal all of the wounds that have been uncovered in 4 years or 8 years.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
We have pulled away from, I know I'm going to mess this up, NATO and somebody else and somebody else. And I don't know if their rules and regs say you can just another president can just walk back in with no penalties. I hear that Brexit might be going kind of good for some and bad for most or many. I don't know how we walk out of this domestically or internationally.
I like the way you're putting it, Dr. Aldean, and it's really, it both speaks to the optimist me and the pessimist me. The optimist me says that no, a new president will basically come into office and international will be fine again. That's the optimist. The pessimist in me, and I agree with you, the pessimist in me says there's going to be a very high cost. There's already been a very high cost to the incoherence of American leadership, to the sort of like disgruntlement that we're exhibiting abroad about the very systems that we created. NATO was created here, the United Nations was created here in San Francisco. NATO, here's the thing, you could complain about those organizations as much as anybody, but the pessimist in me says that we have made it impossible for any future president to look our allies straight in the eye and say, we're with you.
Well, we have to
Dangerous.
catch Joe Biden on a day when he's awake. So, given what our realities are, Professor Hibbert, I mean, we know we got to take little baby steps. If I had to put under Biden's eyes a list, you must do these 5 things first. They will have a domino effect in some other areas, but at least these 5 before you go back to nap.
So the first thing is we need a coherent response to COVID-19.
Yeah.
The irony behind all of this is Trump keeps talking about how the economy is going to get back on track, but if you got to get COVID under control before you can do anything. So that's got to be number one. And I think there are other sets of issues, foreign policy, domestic policy, whatever. But I think what people will be voting for is a return to a sense of normality. And I think if that is well, let me rephrase this. If there is a message of the Biden campaign is we represent that return to normality. Bringing people in, respecting experts, respecting the science, working collaboratively with states, but setting a nationwide policy, trying to coordinate between states so that states aren't competing with one another for resources, and boom, that's day one. And I think it's got to then start work from there. Second thing is got to be some kind of economic stimulus plan that didn't get done with the with the current administration in this last month or so. And the thing is, what hung up the economic stimulus for for this in this latest round is the administration wants money to go to corporate America and Wall Street and banks. The Democrats wanted it to go to state and local government, firefighters, unions, police officers, first responders, and also to the university system. The university system is hemorrhaging money right now. So there's all these sectors that really, really need help. And that's got to be, front and center of the next administration. And then I would argue, we need to get our diplomatic team back on the field. Mm-hmm. And that's really, that's the State Department's gutted, and the Trump administration has largely taken over foreign policy, made it very personalistic, and relied heavily on the military. And we really need to go back to that. Rebuild the American presence overseas, or our diplomatic presence overseas. And then the final thing is we got to return to the rule of law.
I've counted about 20 things now.
Huh?
I know.
I've counted about 20 things now out of 5 that Scott was talking about earlier. It's a nice list. It's an important list.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, and we're going to take another quickie break, is how do we deal with social issues, public policy? And this is Professor Amin Dean. This is Critical Talk with Scott Hibbert and Khalil Marar. And they are reteaching me the new core of political science. And we will be right back.
Assalamu alaikum!
I love Adam's World because it makes me learn in a fun way. That Adam has a green face and orange hair. I like this song. I like how Adam sings. I like Adam's World because it makes me happy. What? No. And here's Adam and here's Anissa. Adam and his sister. Adam is a boy and he is very smart.
Download the new Adams World app at adamsworldapp.com and let's help tomorrow's Muslims today.
Okay, everybody's back. I wanted to go back to something Khalil said. So, knowing this dire need for diplomacy, and I'm not talking about the little, I won't call them a name, but they're not based in political science and cultural studies in the way that they should be. And that's just me. I retire, so nobody has to listen to me. But are you guys thinking about programs to boost our cadre of students ready to go into diplomacy?
Yes.
Yes.
So DePaul has actually just created a new school of diplomacy just in the last year and a half.
Okay, but it has, yeah, that's good.
And we're emphasizing a social justice approach to diplomacy and public affairs in general.
Yeah,
at Governor State University.
Yeah.
Good.
Sorry to cut you off. One of the kind of the elements of this new school is what's called transprofessional diplomacy, and the idea is that diplomacy happens at all different levels, and in this interconnected world, it's not just relations between states; it's also relations between societies and in relations within societies. And so there's a strong social justice component to it, and this kind of gets back to some of the points you're making earlier. I mean, I have a great deal of faith in the younger generations, in part because I see them and they seem so much more attuned to the challenges of our society in a way that I think older generations just don't see it. And the world they've grown up in is a very different world. And so there's Khalil talks about the optimist and the pessimist. Whenever I look at my students, I'm optimistic. Whenever I turn on the news, I get pessimistic.
Well, the other thing is our students are also being attuned to being greedy. I was playing on the PS4 the other night, and one of the what can I say?
I love it.
It's the perks of retirement. But anyway,
I love it.
one of the things that in keeping up with that kind of avenue of news is that these kids are learning that they can make tens of thousands of dollars game playing. Now it does mean that they sit in front of a computer screen playing these games because you can't really walk away, right? But there is a heightened notion of consumerism and greed that will have to be tempered with the lofty notions of you guys' optimism. You know what I'm saying? Because even this morning with France, all over the news was laïcité. There was also some stuff about Nice and some other stuff like, oh my God, France has never done anything to anybody in its life. Why would somebody want to attack us? And I'm sitting there saying, even dumb me knows, really? Now, granted, we don't want to play the revenge game, but how do political scientists who have a cultural bent intervene and find that nexus?
It's I said earlier an emphasis on social justice. I think to sort of elaborate on that, we have to emphasize a moral core and ethical core. And I think you're right, Dr. LD. No, we're not paying enough attention to that. But on the flip side, I got to be honest with you. If I could make tens of thousands of dollars gaming, I would do that in a heartbeat for something that I do for free anyway.
Yeah.
I don't want to say greed is good, as a 1986 movie once said, as Michael Douglas once said, but greed is the driver. Self-interest is the driver of any rational system, right? If you believe, it's a big if you believe that capitalism is a rational system, greed is good. That is not to say that it's unfettered greed. It's regulated greed. So I could be greedy and, sell drugs to people and make money. There is the little reality that drugs are illegal for the most part. So greed has to be checked, and ideally it would be checked by a government that wants the best for its people, not like China, right? Not like a government that is paternalistic or patriarchal, but a government by the people, from the people, for the people. That's the American experiment as I see it, as an immigrant boy myself.
Well, as a non-immigrant girl, I'm saying that's a bunch of you know what.
So,
Scott?
Have faith, my sister.
So even like Adam Smith had, who wrote Wealth of Nations, said, came out with the idea of the invisible hand. Even he wrote another book talking about the importance of values and an internal moral core to check those, the avarice and greed, self-interested tendencies. Because if you have unfettered greed, you have anarchy. And so states are, that's what laws are about, is checking that. And Khalil makes an important point that that's essentially what American regulated capitalism is meant to do. That people pursue their self-interest, but there are rules and regulations and guidances. But there's also that internal check that what you're doing is constrained by a commitment to social justice or values or religion or what have you.
But it seems to me that what both of you are saying in these new programs that are popping up is you political scientists are going to have to stretch your horizons.
Yeah.
And some way or the other, you're going to have to persuade that the other disciplines where cultural studies has traditionally lay, that you're not in competition with them, but you're adding to a smorgasbord of stuff. Because I think one of my grandsons was walking around with, what was it? Marx's book, and I'm looking at him, he's 15, and I'm saying, really? And he said, yeah, but let me tell you about capitalism. And I said, oh my God, do not ask me for another PS4 game. But the other side of that is we don't have, from my understanding, and it's limited, a pure capitalism, nor do we have a pure democracy.
Right.
And what we've been pushing is something called democracy, when it's a democracy whose base is socialism.
Or in terms of the economy, it's a mixed economy. I mean, there is government intervention in the economy, and to be fair, you couldn't have an economic order without government intervention. I mean, if anything else, you need the government to enforce contracts and
protect private property.
Right. So
the government has eminent domain. Yeah. It's not enforcing anything,
right?
Except its own greed. I'm sorry.
And the thing is, the reason why we even have these socialist elements within our system, whether it's Medicare or Social Security or whatever, they were really designed to save. Yeah, they were designed to save capitalism from a communist revolution. I mean, a lot of this all comes out of the New Deal, where Franklin Delano Roosevelt, people saw him as a traitor to his class because he was, creating all these social programs. But from his perspective, he was trying to engage in moderate reform in order to avoid violent revolution. And all you had to do is look at Russia and look at, what was happening in Germany at the time. And, it was more likely they were going to violent revolution than moderate reform. So.
But if we have something and I have to live my life being threatened with something that I've earned, well, we're going to take it away. We're going to diminish it. It's under attack. It's something, there's no comfort there.
Yeah, actually, no, by the way, well, sorry, go ahead.
No, please, go ahead. I want to hear it.
Look, no one's taking away Medicare, no one's taking away Social Security. Old people vote, and so it's safe.
Watch that old part. Okay.
All right. Sorry. But the thing is, this is one of the challenges of any campaign. Everyone trots out, the scare tactics.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Donald Trump on the campaign trail, what's he talking about? Well, if you vote for Joe Biden, you're going to get a Venezuelan-style socialist system, tomorrow, and next thing you know, we're going to be Cuba. I mean, that's first of all, well, some people are like, God, if only if.
Hey.
But the reality is, we'll return to kind of centrist politics and a regulated capitalist system. I mean, no one's going to, no one's talking about nationalizing the means of production. And so if we, and again, this is one of the challenges of the campaign trail, is there's a lot of hyperbole. I think what bothers me is the degree of it on this campaign trail.
Yeah.
And also, the active disinformation that comes through social media. And like it killed me the other week when Rudy Giuliani introduced this story to the Washington or the New York Post about Hunter Biden's fictitious laptop, and the intelligence agencies are saying, yeah, this is Russian disinformation. Why are you passing this on?
Exactly.
It's
outrageous.
Yeah, and they're doing it for political gain. Yeah.
Survive Tuesday. And I'm going to, of course, ask you all to come back on with your coffee, because I know you'll be up all night sometime in the next 10 days to see where we are.
Okay.
This has been delightful as always. I keep taking notes. I love being in class, except my notes don't match from moment to moment, but that's okay. This is Professor Amin Al-Din with Critical Talk, a production of Muslim Network TV, and I've had a rip-roaring conversation with our optimism and pessimism with Professors Scott Hibbert and Khalil Murar. Thank you both.